In the early 13th century, southern France became the unlikely battleground for one of the most brutal and ideologically charged campaigns in medieval Europe. Pope Innocent III issued a call to arms, urging Christians to take up the sword and fight against the growing religious movement in the south of France. Cities were leveled, armies destroyed. This was a crusade unlike anything Europe had seen before, and would go on to become the bloodiest crusade in history. The Cathar movement took root and flourished in southern France during the 12th century, spreading rapidly among both the common people and the nobility. Its teachings challenged the authority and opulence of the Catholic Church. By 1209, large regions of southern France and parts of Italy and Bulgaria were under the control of Catharic beliefs. However, it was largely opposed by many northern French barons who considered it a threat to Christendom. Pope Innocent III called for a full-scale military crusade against the Cathars, transforming what had been a spiritual and theological dispute into a brutal and drawn-out war on French soil. By mid-1209, around 10,000 Crusaders had gathered in Lyon before marching south. The army that marched south was made up mostly of northern French barons, many eager to expand their influence and carve out new territories. At their head was Simon de Montfort, a pious but ruthless nobleman who would soon become the face of the northern Crusaders. The French barons were supported by roughly 2,000 heavy cavalry and around 12,000 infantry. These were mainly French troops, but some had volunteered from England and Austria. In 1209, the Crusaders marched to war. The campaign would begin with terrifying speed and brutality. The first major target was the prosperous city of Béziers, a known stronghold of Cathar sympathizers. When the Crusaders arrived in July 1209, they demanded that the city surrender all heretics. The citizens refused. What followed became one of the most infamous massacres of the Middle Ages. The Crusaders stormed the city and indiscriminately slaughtered its inhabitants. Estimates suggest that as many as 20,000 people were killed in Béziers. Following the bloodbath at Béziers, the crusading army turned its sights to Carcassonne, another stronghold known for its significant Cathar population. Though the city was heavily fortified, it was also swollen with refugees fleeing the violence, making it both vulnerable and tense. The Crusaders covered the roughly 45-mile journey from Béziers in just 6 days, arriving at the gates of Carcassonne on the 1st of August, 1209. A week later, the attackers had successfully cut off the city's water supply, putting immense pressure on the defenders. In an attempt to negotiate, Raymond Roger Trencavel, the young Viscount of Carcassonne, entered talks under a flag of truce, but was seized and imprisoned. Isolated, dehydrated and leaderless, the city surrendered on the 15th of August. Though spared, the citizens of Carcassonne were expelled, stripped of their possessions and forced to flee, many into a life of exile and poverty. From there, with no real force to stop them, the Crusaders moved relentlessly through the region. City after city fell, Albi, Castres and others, many subjected to sieges, mass executions, and forced conversions. The Northern Crusaders were not merely destroying a heretical faith, they were systematically dismantling the social and political order of the South. Lands were seized, castles razed, and local lords either killed, dispossessed, or humiliated. Simon de Montfort began to consolidate power, carving out a personal principality in the heart of southern France. His campaigns were brutal and unrelenting, but also effective. Still, resistance persisted. The Counts of Toulouse, especially Raymond VI and later his son Raymond VII, continued to resist the Crusaders. Seeing this threat, the Crusaders marched on Toulouse. The town was besieged, but by this stage of the crusade, the attackers were low on supplies and manpower. Simon de Montfort was forced to withdraw before the end of the month. Emboldened, Raymond VII launched a siege against Montfort at Castelnaudry in September. However, a contingent of Crusaders soon arrived to support Montfort and narrowly repelled the troops led by Raymond Roger. With the siege broken, Raymond was compelled to retreat back to Toulouse. In early 1212, Simon again besieged Toulouse, this time encircling it. This move cut Raymond's communication with his allies in Aquitaine and the Pyrenees. He faced a shortage of income and increasingly disloyal vassals. Raymond decided to turn to a powerful ally across the Pyrenees Mountains, his brother-in-law, King Peter II of Aragon. Peter II was not only a major monarch of the Iberian Peninsula, but he had fought the Moors in Spain and served in the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. In September 1212, Peter crossed the Pyrenees with a substantial army of some 15,000 men, made up of Aragonese knights, Catalan troops, Occitan militias, and allied mercenaries. His aim was to confront Simon de Montfort, break the siege of Toulouse, and restore Raymond to full power. Montfort got news of the incoming Aragonese army and retreated to the small fortified town of Muret, south of Toulouse, to make a stand. There, on the plains outside the town, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic confrontations of the entire crusade. A battle that would decide not just the fate of Cathar resistance, but the political future of southern France itself. Inside Muret, Simon de Montfort prepared for the fight of his life. His forces were outnumbered perhaps 10 to 1, but they were hardened by years of campaign, disciplined, cohesive, and led by a commander who thrived in moments of desperation. Montfort had no illusions. If he lost, the crusade would collapse, and the Cathar cause would rise again. Peter's army, however, had grown complacent. Their camp was relaxed, even celebratory. Many assumed Montfort would not dare to come out and fight. Montfort burst out from the village, catching the southern forces completely off guard. The Crusader charge was sudden and surgical, and the shock of impact was devastating. Southern knights were caught off guard, many hadn't even mounted yet, and the cohesion of Peter's army disintegrated almost immediately. In the confusion, Montfort's knights identified and overwhelmed Peter II's unit. Because he wore no royal insignia, King Peter was killed before his troops realized who he was. When word of his death spread, some say within minutes, a wave of panic swept through the Allied forces. Command structure collapsed, units fled the field, and the battle quickly turned into a massacre. The exact number of casualties remains uncertain, but sources suggest thousands died in the rout that followed. Montfort's cavalry chased down fleeing soldiers across the countryside. The battle that had begun with southern confidence ended in complete humiliation. It was a serious blow to the Cathar resistance, and in 1214 the situation became worse. As the Crusaders continued their advance, Raymond and his son were forced to flee to England. Raymond VI, together with Raymond VII, returned to the region 2 years later and soon raised a substantial force from disaffected towns. His army besieged Beaucaire in May. After 3 months, the occupants were running low on supplies and reached an agreement with Raymond to surrender the castle in exchange for being allowed to leave with their weapons. On the 12th of September 1217, Raymond then retook Toulouse without a fight, while Montfort was occupied dealing with uprisings in the Foix region. Responding to a call from Pope Honorius III to renew the crusade, Montfort hurried back to Toulouse and began the siege in the spring of 1218. On the 25th of June, while attempting to fend off a sally by the defenders, Montfort was struck and killed by a stone hurled from defensive siege equipment. Toulouse was held and the Crusaders driven back. After the death of Simon de Montfort in 1218 during the Siege of Toulouse, the crusade lost momentum. However, by then, much of Languedoc had been devastated and the local nobility weakened. In the following years, political negotiations, skirmishes, and further interventions by the French crown, especially under Louis VIII and later Louis IX, continued to erode local autonomy. By 1229, the military campaign had largely achieved its objectives. Raymond VII, Count of Toulouse, and one of the last major noble supporters of the Cathars, was militarily defeated and politically isolated. Under pressure from King Louis IX and the Church, he agreed to the Treaty of Paris, which marked a formal end to the Albigensian Crusade.